We already moved her furniture in, Dad, so you just need to calm down and accept it, Brian said. My son stood in the center of my living room, his arms crossed over his chest like a barricade. The heavy bass of a daytime television program vibrated through the oak floorboards and traveled straight up through the soles of my leather shoes. The sharp, artificial sting of cheap lavender room spray burned the back of my throat, completely suffocating the faint scent of lemon oil my late wife always used on the baseboards. I squeezed my keyring until the jagged metal edges dug deep into the center of my palm, leaving a crescent moon indentation in my skin. This unit has been vacant for exactly 3 months while being prepared for a long-term professional rental program, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Exactly, Brian said, waving his hand toward the open kitchen layout. Which is why Melissa and I decided to bring Sharon here. You have the main house in the suburbs. You do not need this place right now. I looked past his shoulder to where Sharon sat right in the middle of my custom velvet sofa. The woman did not look away, nor did she offer a single word of apology. She simply lifted one of my favorite ceramic mugs and took a slow sip of coffee. For 40 years, I worked as a commercial property manager. My entire career involved drafting airtight leases, enforcing rigid community boundaries, and dealing with entitled squatters who thought the rules did not apply to them. Now, at 69 years old, the trespasser standing inside my upscale investment property was my own flesh and blood. My name, Raymond Brooks, sat on the deed and the mortgage documents. Yet Brian spoke as if he owned the walls, the floor, and the very air between us. Did you copy my spare key? I asked. Brian shifted his weight from his left foot to his right. I borrowed the one from your kitchen drawer last Sunday when we came over for dinner. Look, Sharon is going to keep the place clean, and it is honestly better to have someone living here to keep an eye on things. You moved an unauthorized resident into a restricted condominium community governed by a strict homeowners association without consulting the legal owner, I said. Brian rolled his eyes and let out a loud, exaggerated breath. I am your son. I did not think I needed to submit a formal rental application to my own father. Family helps family, Dad. Melissa has been stressed out trying to find a good place for her mom, and your place was just sitting here collecting dust. I could have shouted at him. The heat rose rapidly in my chest, threatening to spill over into a bitter argument. I could have demanded that Sharon pack her bags immediately and threatened to call the police, but anger is a terrible legal strategy. I knew from decades of professional experience that an emotional reaction, a verbal argument, or even a drawn-out negotiation could easily be twisted into implied consent in a courtroom. If I stood here and argued with my son about how his mother-in-law should behave while living in my home, I would be legally acknowledging her right to be there. I would transform her from a trespasser into an accepted occupant. I refused to give him that power. I reached into the inner pocket of my wool coat and pulled out my cellular phone. I unlocked the screen and opened my text messages. I typed a specific, carefully worded message to Brian, right there while he watched my thumbs move across the glass. I hit send. A second later, Brian's phone buzzed loudly in his front pocket. He pulled it out, his brow furrowing as he read the illuminated screen. I see you have accessed the property, Brian read aloud, his tone dripping with utter confusion. I will contact you on Friday to discuss the property management protocols for this unit. Do not alter any fixtures. He looked up at me, letting out a short, dismissive laugh. Dad, what on earth is this? Are you seriously sending me a formal text message while we are standing in the exact same room? I am leaving now, I said, sliding my phone back into my coat. You are being ridiculous, Brian said, shaking his head and putting his hands on his hips. We will come over for dinner on Sunday. Sharon will make her famous pot roast, and we can all just sit down and relax. I did not offer a reply. I simply turned around, walked out the front door, and pulled it shut behind me. I listened closely for the heavy, satisfying click of the deadbolt locking into the metal frame. The condominium hallway was perfectly quiet, a sharp contrast to the blaring television inside my unit. I stood there on the carpet for a long moment, pulling fresh, cool air into my lungs. My chest felt incredibly tight. My own son had looked me right in the eye, stolen my property, and hidden behind the sacred word of family to justify his massive overstep. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone for the second time. I bypassed the text messages and opened the secure security application for the building. I scrolled down to the electronic access log. There it was in black and white. Brian had used his guest key fob at 8 in the morning, then again at 9, then again at 11:15. I pressed the buttons on my phone to take a digital screenshot of the log. saving the image to a new, secure folder. Next, I opened the camera application connected to the doorbell ring device mounted outside my door. I downloaded the video clips from earlier in the day. The screen showed Brian and Sharon carrying cardboard boxes and suitcases through my front door. Every single timestamp was captured perfectly. Every violation of the building rules was permanently preserved. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the brass elevator doors. I did not call a lawyer. A lawyer would send a strongly worded letter, and Brian would simply throw it in the trash, completely confident that his elderly father would never actually take him to court. My son firmly believed that my silence in that living room was a sign of surrender. He thought I walked away because I was too tired and too weak to fight him and his wife. Brian had forgotten what I did for a living. I stepped into the empty elevator car and pressed the round button for the ground floor lobby. As the metal doors slid closed, sealing me inside, I scrolled through my business contact list. I bypassed my friends and family members, stopping when I found the direct office number for the executive property management firm that handled all the official leasing for the building. I pressed the green call button and lifted the phone to my ear, listening to the steady ringing sound. It was time to schedule a meeting. The brass elevator doors slid open, revealing the expansive marble lobby of the ground floor. My leather shoes clicked against the polished stone as I bypassed the mahogany concierge desk and headed straight for the frosted glass doors of the property management suite. The air down here felt entirely different from the hallway outside my unit. It smelled of crisp linen and expensive floor wax, a scent that always signaled order and absolute control. David, the senior community director, looked up from his dual monitors the moment I pushed the heavy glass door open. We had worked together for nearly 5 years. The younger man knew my professional background, and we spoke the exact same precise language of bylaws, liabilities, and lease agreements. "Raymond," David said, standing up quickly to smooth the front of his tailored suit jacket. "I did not expect you to visit the office today. We have a situation in Unit 412, I said. Taking a seat in one of the firm leather guest chairs, I placed my briefcase on the carpet. David sat back down and immediately pulled up my resident file on his right screen. His keyboard clicked rapidly in the quiet room. "I assume this is about the moving truck currently parked in the loading bay," David noted, his eyes scanning the digital visitor logs. "The desk attendant mentioned earlier that your son was supervising a move. Did you decide to furnish the unit before the new tenant arrives?" "My son moved his mother-in-law into the unit," I explained, keeping my tone entirely conversational. "Without authorization, without a background check, and without my permission." The clicking stopped immediately. David pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose, leaning back in his chair. "Raymond, you know the community guidelines better than anyone else in this building. An unvetted occupant triggers an immediate homeowners association violation. I need you to issue the standard courtesy notice," I told him. "Do not skip straight to the financial fines. Just generate the official compliance warning and timestamp it for today." A courtesy notice carried no immediate financial penalty. The document simply served as a formal, legally binding warning that a rule infraction had occurred. Creating a verifiable paper trail was always the very first step in building a fortress, and I needed the foundation to be completely flawless before I made my next move. David clicked his mouse a few times, sending a command to the large commercial printer in the corner of the room. The machine hummed to life, pulling crisp white paper through its rollers. "I can do that right now," David said, his voice dropping slightly. "But we have a much bigger problem on our hands. The relocation agent for the hospital executive called an hour ago. A cold knot formed directly in the center of my stomach. For the past 3 weeks, David and I had been quietly negotiating a premium corporate lease for a new chief of surgery relocating to the city. The proposed deal represented a substantial monthly income, far above the standard market rate. "Did they sign the final draft?" I asked, watching the printer spit out the courtesy notice. "Not yet," David replied, reaching over to grab the warm sheet of paper from the output tray. "They are ready to execute the agreement on Monday morning. But I obviously cannot lease them an occupied unit. If we cancel the deal now, we lose the applicant entirely. Since no signatures are on the final lease yet, you are not technically in breach of contract." That revelation was the precise definition of a double-edged sword. I managed to avoid a devastating corporate lawsuit, but Brian and his stunt were going to cost me an absolute fortune in lost rental revenue. "Calculate the exact projected financial loss based on the hospital offer," I instructed, unlocking my briefcase to retrieve an empty manila folder. "Include the premium month-to-month rate, plus the standard unauthorized occupant fees mandated by the building." "That is going to be a very large number," David warned. I want every single cent documented, I said. And pull my landlord insurance policy as well. Go straight to Section 4, Paragraph 2. David paused, his hands hovering over the keyboard as the realization washed over his face. Unverified occupancy. If she leaves a burner on and starts a kitchen fire, the insurance company will deny the claim entirely because she is not a registered tenant. The financial exposure was massive. My son had not simply borrowed an empty room to save his wife some stress. Brian had unknowingly placed my entire investment portfolio at immense risk just to look like a generous hero to his mother-in-law. He had no idea what kind of legal machinery he had just set into motion. I spent the next hour sitting in that quiet office, steadily assembling my ammunition. David printed the Homeowners Association courtesy compliance notice, the specific insurance policy, liability clauses, and the entire email chain with the hospital relocation agent. Each piece of paper went directly into my manila folder. I tapped the bottom of the stack against the wooden desk, ensuring the edges aligned perfectly before closing the cover. The weight of the file felt solid and reassuring in my hands. My phone vibrated inside my coat pocket. Pulling it out, I saw a new text message from Brian, illuminating the glass screen. "We are heading out to pick up some groceries, Dad. Sharon is getting settled. Talk soon." He really thought I had surrendered. The boy mistook a tactical, silent retreat for a white flag of defeat. He genuinely believed that my lack of shouting meant he had successfully bullied his way into ownership. "Raymond," David said, his voice suddenly breaking the comfortable silence of the room. The property manager was staring intensely at his left monitor, his eyebrows pulled close together. "You might want to see this." Standing up, I walked around the heavy wooden desk to stand behind his leather chair. "Residents have access to the community portal to register guests for parking and amenity access," David explained, pointing at a newly submitted digital form on his screen. "Your son just filled this out from his mobile phone." I leaned closer to read the small black text. Brian had officially registered Sharon for a permanent parking garage pass and a digital pool key. But to complete the process, the system required the user to check a tiny digital box at the very bottom of the page. The small print clearly stated that the registering resident accepted full financial and legal responsibility for any damages, fees, or violations incurred by their registered guest. My son had just signed a binding digital contract, accepting liability for a woman living illegally in my property. The financial burden had just shifted entirely onto his shoulders, and he had provided the evidence himself. "Print that out," I said, a slow and deep breath filling my lungs. "Print it twice." Sitting in the quiet study of my suburban home, I placed the two freshly printed registration forms flat on the surface of my mahogany desk. The heavy silence of the empty house usually brought me peace, but this evening, the stillness only amplified the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I reached for my tablet resting near the brass lamp, planning to review the insurance policies David had emailed over. Before I could open my inbox, a bright notification banner slid across the top of the glass screen. Melissa had just updated her public social media profile. My daughter-in-law rarely posted anything unless it served to elevate her own status among her friends and neighbors. Tapping the small icon, I watched her page load. A block of enthusiastic text sat above a collection of 3 brightly filtered photographs. "So incredibly blessed to help my sweet mother settle into her gorgeous new downtown home today," Melissa had typed, finishing the sentence with a series of small, colorful icons. "Huge thanks to my amazing husband for arranging everything and making sure family always comes first." I tapped the first photograph to enlarge the image, and a sudden, sharp pressure settled directly behind my breastbone. The picture showed Sharon standing in the center of my condominium living room. She wore a floral blouse and a triumphant smile, gesturing toward the windows with a glass of white wine. But my eyes did not linger on the uninvited occupant. My gaze drifted past her shoulder, landing squarely on the custom stone mantel above the fireplace. For 6 years, a thick silver frame had rested on the exact center of that mantel. The frame held my favorite photograph of my late wife, taken during our final anniversary trip to the coast. It was the only personal item I had left in the unit during the renovation process, a quiet anchor in an empty room. The silver frame was gone. In its place sat a cheap ceramic figurine of a rooster, nestled between 2 mismatched candles. The woman had been inside my property for less than 8 hours, and she had already erased the only trace of the person I loved most in this world. My jaw clenched so tightly that my back teeth ground together with an audible click. I stared at the ceramic rooster for a long time. The anger pooling in my stomach begged me to drive straight back into the city, unlock that front door, and throw their cardboard boxes out into the hallway. But giving into that raw emotion would only grant Brian the chaotic family drama he desperately needed to justify his actions. He wanted an angry, unreasonable old man to complain about to his friends. I refused to play the part. Pressing the two small buttons on the edge of the tablet, I captured a digital screenshot of the photograph. The quick flash of the screen confirmed the image was saved to the device. I swiped to the next slide. The third photograph showed Brian lounging on my velvet sofa like a wealthy aristocrat inspecting his newly acquired estate. Scrolling down below the image, I found the public comment section already filled with replies from extended family members and friends. "Wow, this place is stunning," a cousin of Melissa had written. "Did Raymond really just give up his investment property?" Brian had replied directly to the comment just 10 minutes ago. "Dad was totally on board." My son lied. His words permanently recorded in the public forum. He practically begged us to use the place since it was sitting empty. He loves having family close by, so he handed us the keys and told us to make it our own. The sheer arrogance of the boy took my breath away. Brian was not simply stealing the use of a premium piece of real estate. He was actively building a public, completely fabricated narrative of my willing generosity to mask his theft. My son wanted the financial benefits of my lifetime of hard work, but he also demanded the social credit for providing it to his wife. I captured another screenshot, preserving every single lie before he could ever delete them. Creating a new digital folder on my tablet, I labeled it with the current month and year. I moved the security camera footage, the key fob access logs, and all the new social media screenshots into the secure file. Every piece of evidence originated directly from Brian and Melissa. The young couple was building the entire legal case against themselves, and they were completely oblivious to the trap closing around them. Opening the heavy bottom drawer of my desk, I retrieved a stack of premium legal-grade paper. I pulled out a blank residential lease agreement, selecting the exact standard commercial form used by the property management firm down in the city. Setting the document squarely on the leather desk pad, I uncapped my favorite fountain pen. The dark blue ink flowed smoothly across the thick paper as I began to fill in the blank lines. Under the heading marked Proposed Primary Tenant and Financial Guarantor, I prepared a lease proposal naming Brian Brooks based on the responsibility he had already accepted through the community registration process. The proposal required his signature before it could ever become an executed lease. The man had boldly registered his mother-in-law for community access on the building portal, legally accepting full liability. Now, he was going to pay for the privilege. Moving down to the financial section, I referenced the exact numbers David had calculated earlier that afternoon. I did not use digits. I spelled out every single word to ensure there could be absolutely no misunderstanding in a courtroom. $4,500 per month for the premium corporate rental rate. $200 per day for the unauthorized occupant penalty fee mandated by the Homeowners Association. $1,000 for the standard security deposit. I filled out the entire ledger, meticulously itemizing the utility allocations, the late fee schedules, and the mandatory cleaning deposits. The total sum due upon receipt was staggering. It was enough to completely drain the secret savings account I knew Brian kept hidden from Melissa. Turning to the final page, I pressed the gold nib of my pen against the signature line and signed my name. I folded the completed lease agreement, the itemized invoice, and the official courtesy compliance warning from the building management into a neat stack. After sliding the thick pile of papers into a heavy manila envelope and sealing the flap shut, my pen moved across the front to spell Brian's name in clear, sharp block letters. Tomorrow morning, a bonded courier would deliver this exact package directly into my son's hands. The time for quiet observation was officially over. Morning sunlight spilled across the polished mahogany of my home office desk, catching the dust motes dancing in the quiet air. The heavy manila envelope containing my son's new residential lease sat exactly where I had left it the night before, waiting for the bonded courier to arrive at 9 o'clock. A sharp chime from my open laptop broke the morning silence, pulling my attention to the bright screen. The incoming message was from David, the senior community director at the property management firm. He had attached a digital copy of the official Homeowners Association courtesy compliance notice. The formal warning had been generated, time-stamped, and physically mailed to Unit 412 at exactly 8 in the morning. The legal clock for the unauthorized occupant penalty was officially ticking, establishing a rock-solid occupancy timeline that Brian could never dispute in a courtroom. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. Using my fountain pen, I began to draft a physical ledger of the projected rental losses. The corporate lease with the hospital executive would have brought in $4,500 every single month. By moving his mother-in-law into the space, Brian was actively blocking a lucrative commercial contract. I wrote the numbers out carefully, calculating the lost revenue over a standard 12-month lease period, and tucked the handwritten sheet into my growing evidence file. My cellular phone began to vibrate against the wood surface, buzzing angrily next to my coffee mug. Melissa's name flashed across the digital display. Taking a slow, measured breath to calm my heart rate, I swiped the green button and lifted the device to my ear. "Good morning, Melissa." "Dad, you really need to call the front desk at your building and get them in line," my daughter-in-law demanded, skipping right past any standard morning pleasantries. Her voice carried that sharp, breathless tone she always used when she felt slightly inconvenienced by the rules of polite society. Sharon just tried to have a large grocery order delivered, and the concierge actually made her come all the way down to the lobby to sign for it. They refused to let the delivery driver up to the floor. "The building maintains strict security protocols for unverified guests," I explained, keeping my voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. Melissa let out a loud sigh that cracked over the phone speaker. "She is not a guest, Dad. She is living there now. Brian told you this was a permanent arrangement, so you need to call management and tell them to treat her like an owner. It is completely embarrassing for her to be questioned by the hired help." "I will be sure to address the property management situation very soon," I said. It was not a lie. I was addressing it today, just not in the way she anticipated. "Thank you," Melissa snapped, completely missing the deliberate phrasing of my response. "Brian said you were probably going to transfer the deed to us eventually anyway, so the building staff just needs to back off and let us manage the place." She ended the call without saying goodbye. I lowered the phone, staring at the blank screen as a cold sense of clarity washed over me. Brian had not only lied to his friends on the internet about my willing generosity, my son had actually convinced his wife that I was planning to hand over an upscale commercial asset just because they wanted it. He was spinning a massive web of fiction, completely confident that I would never speak up to correct the narrative. He was incredibly wrong, and I had the exact documentation to prove it. Turning back to my laptop, I opened my email archive and typed Brian's specific email address into the search bar. I filtered the results by date, scrolling back exactly 3 weeks to a brief exchange we had regarding the condominium. My son had sent a casual message asking if he could use the empty unit for a weekend getaway with some college friends. My typed response from 3 weeks ago sat right there on the screen, explicitly clear and legally undeniable. I had told Brian that the unit was strictly off limits because it was currently being prepared for a high-paying corporate lease with a local hospital executive. I scrolled down to read Brian's reply. "Understood, Dad. Hope the hospital pays well. We will find a hotel downtown instead." My chest tightened as I read his own words. Brian knew exactly what he was doing when he moved Sharon into the condominium. He knew about the corporate lease, he knew the property was unavailable, and he knew the financial damage his actions would cause. The public story he posted online about me begging them to use the empty space was a complete fabrication, utterly destroyed by his own written admission from 3 weeks prior. I printed the entire email thread, ensuring the date stamps and header information were clearly visible on the white paper. The pages went directly into the manila folder, resting heavy and secure against the social media screenshots and the parking registration forms. Every single lie he told was now officially documented and contradicted by his own hand. A sudden motion alert from the security application flashed across my phone screen. I tapped the notification, opening the live video feed from the doorbell camera outside my unit. The digital footage showed Sharon standing in the hallway, holding the front door wide open. 2 men in matching blue uniforms were carefully maneuvering a massive, rolled-up area rug through the doorframe. The woman pointed authoritatively toward the living room, directing the workers with absolute confidence. She was not treating the space like a temporary guest room. Sharon was laying down expensive rugs and taking permanent root in my home. The delivery confirmed exactly what I needed to know. The occupancy timeline was locked in stone, proving she had moved substantial personal property into the unit. At exactly 9 o'clock, a heavy knock echoed from my front door. I grabbed the sealed manila envelope from my desk and walked through the quiet house to greet the uniformed courier standing on my porch. I handed him the package, instructing him to deliver it directly into the hands of Raymond Brooks at his corporate architecture firm across town, and requested a mandatory signature upon receipt. For the next 3 hours, I worked in my garden, pulling weeds from the flower beds while the spring sun warmed my shoulders. The physical labor kept my hands busy, but my mind remained entirely focused on the digital tracking application running on my phone. At 12:15 in the afternoon, the phone chimed with a distinct, high-pitched tone. I pulled off my dirt-covered gardening gloves and reached into my pocket. The delivery confirmation illuminated the glass screen, displaying a digital scan of Brian's messy, rushed signature. The courier had successfully handed the heavy lease proposal, the invoice for the documented business interruption losses, remarketing expenses, delayed occupancy costs, and 1 month's confirmed premium rental value, and the official Homeowners Association penalties directly to my son. The trap was no longer just set, it was officially sprung. The digital signature on my phone screen belonged to my son, hastily scrawled across the courier's electronic tracking pad. I sat in the leather chair of my quiet study, staring at those jagged black lines on the glass display. The trap had snapped shut. Now, all I had to do was wait for the inevitable explosion. It did not take very long. At exactly 4:30 in the afternoon, my cellular phone vibrated aggressively against the solid mahogany desk. Brian's name flashed in bright white letters across the screen. I let the device ring 3 times, listening to the heavy buzz echo in the silent room, before finally sliding my thumb across the glass to accept the call. "Is this some kind of sick joke, Dad?" Brian demanded before I could even say hello. The dull, rushing sound of highway traffic bled through the speaker, indicating he was driving home from his architecture firm. "Good afternoon to you, too," I replied. I kept my tone perfectly measured, leaning back into the comfortable leather upholstery. "Did you review the documents inside the envelope?" A sharp, humorless bark of laughter came through the phone. I saw a fake lease and a ridiculous invoice for almost $6,000. Melissa nearly cried, laughing when I sent her a picture of it. "You honestly think I am going to pay you rent for letting my own mother-in-law stay in an empty apartment?" "The property is not empty," I corrected him, my voice dropping to a cool, clinical register. "It is currently occupied by an unvetted resident who is actively racking up a $200 daily penalty from the Homeowners Association. Furthermore, the corporate lease you derailed was worth $4,500 a month." The itemized math is clearly laid out on page 3 of the packet. "Melissa says you are just throwing a tantrum because we did not ask permission," my son said. His voice dripped with the kind of smug condescension usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to a small child. She talked to her friend who works in real estate down in Florida. Her friend said, "You cannot enforce a commercial lease on family members without a prior written agreement. You are trying to scare us with useless paperwork. Her friend is giving you terrible legal advice," I warned quietly. I reached out to touch the printed delivery confirmation resting on my desk, tracing the edge of the stiff paper. "I am not signing anything, and I am definitely not paying you a single dime," the younger man declared, completely ignoring my warning. "Sharon is staying right where she is. You are going to call the building manager tomorrow morning and tell them to drop this whole violation nonsense. If you refuse, we are not coming over for Thanksgiving this year, and you will not see us for Christmas either. Your choice, Dad." He truly thought the threat of withholding family holidays was his ultimate weapon. What the boy did not understand was that his signature on that delivery receipt was the final piece of evidence I needed to bypass his approval completely. "The deadline to sign the residential lease and submit the first payment is Friday at 5 o'clock in the evening," I stated. I completely ignored his emotional holiday ultimatum, refusing to step onto that manipulative battlefield. After that exact time, the Homeowners Association moves from a courtesy compliance notice to a formal financial penalty phase. "Then let them fine you," Brian scoffed, the sound of his turn signal clicking rhythmically in the background. "Your name is on the deed, not mine. They will bill your account, and you can deal with the consequences of being incredibly stubborn." A cold, tight smile touched the corners of my mouth. The man driving that car honestly believed the corporate veil of the building would only fall on the registered property owner. He had completely forgotten the digital guest registration form he filled out on his mobile phone yesterday morning. By officially requesting a permanent parking garage pass for Sharon, Brian had checked a mandatory digital box, accepting full legal and financial responsibility for any community violations caused by his guest. The building management would not deduct the fines from my account. They were going to bill him directly, attaching the massive debt to his personal credit profile. "Friday at 5 o'clock, I repeated, and pressed the red button to end the call before he could offer another arrogant response. Setting the phone face down on the desk, I stood up and walked toward the large window overlooking my backyard. The late spring sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the manicured lawn. Brian and Melissa thought they were cleverly calling my bluff, comfortably hiding behind their twisted definition of family loyalty. They believed that because we shared a last name, the strict rules of a high-end commercial property association would simply vanish into thin air. But the machinery of corporate real estate management did not care about bloodlines, hurt feelings, or Thanksgiving dinners. Contracts were entirely blind to family drama. Walking back to my desk, I opened my laptop and logged into the secure resident portal for the condominium building. The dashboard loaded quickly, displaying my active property status. Right there, flashing in a small yellow box at the top of the screen, was the courtesy compliance notice. A digital timer ticked away underneath the warning, counting down the exact hours and minutes until the formal penalty phase automatically engaged. My son had proudly refused the life raft I sent him in that manila envelope. Now, he was going to drown in the financial avalanche he had started, and the absolute deadline was approaching much faster than he realized. The brass pendulum of my grandfather clock swung back and forth in the quiet hallway, marking the slow passage of time. I sat at my mahogany desk with my laptop open, staring directly at the resident portal for the condominium community. The digital clock on the bottom right corner of my screen read 4:59 in the afternoon. A steaming cup of black coffee rested near my elbow, completely untouched, while I waited for the automated system to execute its programming. At exactly 5 o'clock, the web page refreshed itself. The small yellow warning banner that had hovered at the top of the screen for the past 24 hours vanished. In its place, a solid red notification bar appeared, carrying a bold headline that confirmed the escalation. The courtesy period had officially expired, and the system automatically generated the first daily penalty of $200. I clicked on the accounting tab to view the community ledger, tracking exactly where the automated software had assigned the debt. The homeowners association billed the property owner, exactly as required by the governing documents. Under the occupancy responsibility agreement Brian had voluntarily accepted, I now had the contractual right to recover every documented charge directly from him. The balance appeared underneath the name Brian Brooks, explicitly tying my son to the financial consequences of his own arrogance. A new email chimed in my inbox, breaking the silence of the study. David, the senior property manager, had forwarded a mandatory automated notice from the building's insurance underwriter. The message stated that because an unvetted occupant was currently residing in Unit 412 without a background check or a signed lease, coverage may be denied for claims arising from an unauthorized occupant unless the occupancy is properly disclosed. If Sharon left a candle burning or slipped on the bathroom tile, the insurance company would cover absolutely nothing. The financial exposure was terrifying, but the document was also the perfect piece of leverage. I printed the insurance notice, adding the thick sheet of paper to the growing evidence file on my desk. I finally picked up my coffee mug and took a long sip. The bitter liquid was lukewarm, but it tasted entirely satisfying. Saturday morning arrived, with a heavy spring rain that battered the large window panes of my suburban home. I was sitting in the kitchen, reading the morning newspaper, when my cellular phone vibrated against the granite countertop. The security application pushed a priority motion alert to the lock screen, indicating activity outside the condominium door. Tapping the notification, I opened the live video feed. The camera lens provided a crystal-clear view of the carpeted hallway outside Unit 412. Melissa stood directly in front of the door, holding a folded piece of white paper in her hand. The building concierge delivered all formal HOA correspondence in distinctive red envelopes, and the torn remnants of one lay on the floor near her expensive leather boots. Her mother stood a few feet away, clutching a canvas shopping bag and looking between her daughter and the open doorway. A moment later, Brian stepped out into the hallway. The microphone built into the doorbell device picked up the audio with perfect clarity. "What is this?" Melissa asked, thrusting the paper toward her husband's chest. Her voice lacked its usual entitled edge, replaced instead by a sharp, trembling confusion. "The front desk just handed this to me. It says you owe the building $200 for an unauthorized resident, and it mentions a blocked commercial lease." Brian snatched the paper from her hand, his face instantly draining of color. "It is just a mistake, Mel. Dad is playing some kind of ridiculous game with the management office to prove a point." "A game?" Sharon asked, her brow furrowing as she stepped closer to the couple. "Brian, you told me Raymond was thrilled to have me here. Why would the building send a fine with your name on it?" "Because he registered you on the guest portal," Melissa said, turning to look at her mother before glaring back at her husband. "He put his own credit information into the security system." "Brian, did you actually ask your father if we could do this?" "Of course I did," Brian snapped, though his voice cracked on the final word. He ran a hand nervously through his hair, glancing up and down the empty hallway, as if looking for an escape route. "I told you, he practically gave us the keys. He is just being a stubborn old man because we did not fill out his precious paperwork. The paper says you cost him a corporate contract, Melissa read, pointing at the document in his hands. A contract worth thousands of dollars. You told me the place was just sitting empty and abandoned. It was, Brian insisted, raising his voice to talk over her. Look, I will call him right now and sort this out. Just go inside and unpack the groceries. My son practically shoved his wife and mother-in-law back through the door, pulling it shut behind him before the camera feed cut to black. I set my phone down on the granite counter. The illusion of the generous, protective husband was rapidly shattering, and Melissa was finally realizing that the foundation of their entire living arrangement was built on a massive lie. 10 minutes later, the phone vibrated again. This time, Brian was calling me directly. I answered on the fourth ring. Good morning. I tried to delete the guest profile. Brian rushed out, completely abandoning his smug attitude from the day before. He was breathing heavily, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. I logged into the parking portal to remove Sharon, but the system locked my account. It says I cannot modify the registration while there is an active balance. That is standard protocol for commercial property management, I explained calmly, pulling a fresh paper towel from the roll to wipe a small water drop off the counter. You cannot erase a legal contract just because you suddenly regret the financial terms. The digital footprint is permanent, and the daily fine will continue to compound until the occupant vacates or a lease is signed. You have to call David and cancel the fines, Dad, Brian pleaded. The sheer desperation in his voice was a stark contrast to his previous threats about Thanksgiving dinners. Melissa is asking questions I cannot answer, and the system just attempted to charge the credit card I have on file. If this hits my credit score, we will lose the mortgage rate for the house we want to buy next year. He had finally recognized the true weight of the trap. The evidence could not be shredded, the digital logs could not be deleted, and his own arrogant signature had bound him to the consequences. We are not discussing this over the telephone, I told him, keeping my voice entirely devoid of sympathy. You will meet me at the property management office on Monday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Bring your wife and bring your checkbook. I pressed the button to end the call, leaving my son alone with the silence, the mounting debt, and a wife who was finally demanding the truth. Monday morning arrived with a thick blanket of gray clouds hanging low over the city skyline. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the property management office at exactly 8:45. The front reception area smelled strongly of dark roasted espresso and lemon-scented floor polish, providing a sharp contrast to the stale air of the parking garage below. David already sat at the large conference table in the back room. The senior director was silently sorting through a neat stack of building code regulations and standardized lease agreements. I took the firm leather chair directly across from his workstation, placing my thick manila folder flat on the polished mahogany surface. I had spent my entire Sunday afternoon organizing the paperwork into a very specific, undeniable sequence. The physical order of the documents mattered just as much as the black ink printed on the pages. I did not just want to prove a technical building violation. Brian could easily dismiss a simple administrative error or a forgotten guest pass. Instead, I needed to systematically dismantle the fictional reality my son had aggressively sold to his wife and his mother-in-law. At 9:02, the glass office doors swung open, letting in a rush of cold air from the lobby. Brian walked into the room first. Dark purple circles bruised the delicate skin under his eyes, indicating he had spent a sleepless weekend agonizing over the delivery courier package. His usually perfectly styled hair looked slightly rumpled around the edges. Melissa followed closely behind her husband. My daughter-in-law clutched the thick strap of her designer leather purse so tightly that her knuckles appeared completely white against the dark material. Sharon brought up the rear of the small procession. The older woman lacked her triumphant, confident posture from the weekend photographs. She hovered near the doorway, shifting her weight nervously from foot to foot as her eyes darted around the professional corporate setting. Good morning, I said, keeping my voice low and entirely even. I gestured toward the 3 empty chairs lined up on their side of the long wooden table. Brian pulled out a chair for his wife and sat down heavily next to her. The younger man cleared his throat, attempting to project an air of casual, hurried annoyance. Let us get this ridiculous misunderstanding cleared up quickly, Dad. I have a major client meeting at 11, and Melissa needs to get back to the house to meet a contractor. Instead of answering him directly, my fingers unclasped the metal prongs of the manila folder to extract the first piece of paper. I slid the document across the smooth wood, pushing it directly toward my daughter-in-law and stopping just inches from her hands. Melissa, I said softly, holding her gaze, please read the highlighted paragraph on that page. She dropped her heavy purse onto the carpeted floor and cautiously picked up the printed email thread. Her eyes scanned the header information first, visually confirming the sender address and the date stamp from exactly 3 weeks ago. As she read the bright yellow highlighted text, her shoulders immediately stiffened. The aggressive, defensive energy she had carried into the room evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, rigid stillness. Brian asked to use the condominium for a weekend trip, Melissa read aloud. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, vibrating with sudden tension. And you told him the unit was strictly off limits. You explicitly stated the property was being prepared for a high-paying corporate lease with a hospital executive. She turned her head very slowly to look at the man sitting beside her. You told me the place was completely abandoned. You swore your father begged us to put my mother in there to keep the dust settling. He did, Brian insisted, though a fine sheen of nervous sweat had formed on his forehead. My son reached out to grab the paper from her hands, but Melissa pulled the document swiftly out of his reach. Dad and I talked on the telephone after that email, Mel. He changed his mind later that night. He told me to take the spare keys. That brings us to the second document, David interjected, stepping perfectly into the tense silence. The property manager reached across his keyboard and slid a glossy printout across the table. The digital guest registration form lay exposed under the bright overhead lights. Mr. Brooks, David continued, addressing my son with complete professional detachment. You submitted this permanent parking authorization and amenity access request for Sharon from your mobile device last Friday morning. To complete this specific digital form, our security system requires the resident to verify their identity and explicitly accept all financial liability for their registered guest. Melissa stared blankly at the digital signature printed at the bottom of the page. You put your own social security number and your personal credit card on a permanent guest file? She asked, her voice rising sharply in pitch. Without discussing a financial commitment like that with me? I had to secure the parking garage pass, Brian argued, his hands waving frantically over the mahogany table. They were going to tow her car out to the impound lot, Melissa. I just checked a mandatory box to get the plastic permit. It does not actually mean anything in the real world. It is a legally binding contract, I corrected him. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool edge of the table to close the physical distance between us. You completely bypassed the formal leasing office and registered an unvetted occupant under your own name. The Homeowners Association has already billed the property owner. Under the occupancy responsibility documents you signed, every documented charge can now be recovered directly from you. Furthermore, the hospital executive officially pulled out of the corporate lease negotiation yesterday afternoon because the unit was currently occupied. The documented financial losses include 1 month of confirmed premium rental income, remarketing expenses, administrative costs, and business interruption damages caused by the delayed occupancy. Every dollar is supported by invoices, management records, and written communications. A sharp gasp echoed from the back of the room. Sharon took a sudden step forward, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. $54,000? The older woman repeated, her eyes wide with genuine panic. She looked directly at her son-in-law, and all the previous confidence completely drained from her face. Brian, you told me everything was cleared with the building administration. You said this was a free family property. I am on a fixed retirement income, so I absolutely cannot afford to help you pay those kinds of commercial penalties. Nobody is paying any penalties, Brian shouted, slamming his open palm flat against the mahogany table. The loud smack made David jump slightly in his seat, but I kept my posture perfectly relaxed. My son pointed a shaking finger across the table at me. You are just bluffing, Dad. You cannot prove I moved her in there permanently. She is just visiting for a few days. It is my word against yours, and no judge will ever enforce a massive corporate loss on a simple family visit. He was clinging desperately to the final fraying shreds of his fabricated story. The architect honestly believed he could hide behind plausible deniability, falsely assuming the building administration only possessed standard, boring paperwork. Brian had absolutely no idea the trap was lined with high-definition technology. I looked at David and gave the manager a short, firm nod. The property director reached for the small plastic remote control sitting near his computer mouse. He pointed the device at the large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall directly behind us. The dark screen blinked to life, displaying a paused, high-resolution video frame of the condominium hallway. The final phase of the meeting was just beginning. The large flat-screen monitor flickered to life on the office wall. A high-definition video began to play, filling the quiet conference room with the muffled, rhythmic thumping of a heavy-moving cart rolling across carpet. Two men wearing matching blue uniforms struggled to maneuver a massive area rug down the hallway. Sharon stood in the center of the frame, pointing aggressively toward the open door of Unit 412. "Just put it right in the middle of the living room," the older woman directed, her recorded voice echoing sharply from the television speakers. "My daughter ordered a brand new dining set that will arrive tomorrow morning, so we need to leave the entryway completely clear." I watched Melissa physically recoil from the bright screen. The young woman turned her head, staring at her mother in complete disbelief. "A new dining set?" my daughter-in-law asked, her voice cracking over the final word. "Mom, you told me you were just bringing a few suitcases until we figured out a permanent arrangement. You bought full-sized furniture for his apartment?" Sharon looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. She was completely unable to meet her daughter's eyes. Brian swallowed hard, and his throat bobbed visibly above his shirt collar. "Okay, fine. She brought some furniture over, but that does not prove anything. You still cannot prove I orchestrated any of this. I just gave her a ride, Dad." He was still trying to lie, even as the walls closed in around him. Reaching back into my thick manila folder, I pulled out the electronic access logs David had generated for me earlier in the week. "The building security system tracks every single entry," I explained, sliding the printed spreadsheet across the polished mahogany table. "Your guest key fob accessed the main lobby doors, the elevator, and the specific unit lock exactly 14 times over the course of the weekend. You did not just give her a ride. You personally escorted the moving crew, carried the heavy boxes, and intentionally bypassed the security desk." My son stared at the neat rows of black ink on the page. His mouth opened and closed several times, but he failed to produce a single sound. "And let us not forget the public narrative you created," I added, pulling out the glossy screenshot of the social media page. I placed the photograph right next to the access logs, tapping the paper with my index finger. "You replied to a cousin online, publicly stating that I begged you to take the keys because the unit was abandoned." The architect stared at the collection of paper spreading across the table. Every single document told a damning, undeniable story. "Look at the evidence," I commanded softly, leaning forward to close the physical distance between us. "Read the email thread where you acknowledged the corporate lease. Review the digital guest registration where you accepted full financial liability. Watch the video footage of the furniture delivery. Check the access logs tying you directly to the physical entry. You built this entire trap all by yourself." Melissa covered her face with both hands, letting out a ragged, trembling breath. The young woman finally understood the sheer scale of her husband's deception, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. "You set me up," Brian whispered. His eyes grew wide with a mixture of terror and sudden realization. "You let me move her in so you could build a case against me." I slowly shook my head. The accusation was insulting, completely ignoring the reality of the situation. "I did not set you up," I corrected him, making sure my voice carried a firm, authoritative weight. "I simply went out of town. You made the active decision to take my keys, unlock my door, and move an unauthorized occupant into a restricted building. In fact, you provided every single piece of evidence against yourself. You wrote the emails, you signed the registration, you swiped the key fob, and you posted the lies on the internet. I did absolutely nothing except press the print button." David cleared his throat, pulling the attention back to the head of the conference table. The property manager adjusted his glasses and looked directly at the younger man. "Mr. Brooks, if the documented charges remain unpaid, they may eventually be referred to collections in accordance with the community policies," David stated, his tone clinical and completely detached. "Because you signed the digital liability waiver, the debt belongs exclusively to you. The current balance includes $5,000 for the broken community rules, plus the $54,000 in lost corporate revenue from the hospital executive." "I do not have $59,000, Brian choked out, slumping heavily back into his leather chair. The arrogant, untouchable facade had completely shattered, leaving behind a terrified man facing absolute financial ruin. "Melissa and I just paid off her student loans last month. If you hit my credit score with this massive debt, we will lose the mortgage rate for our new house. We will lose everything." The deadline to sign the residential lease and establish a payment plan was last Friday at 5 o'clock, David stated firmly, offering absolutely no sympathy or room for negotiation. "The debt is now active and compounding daily." My son looked up at me, his eyes shining brightly with unshed tears. The boy who had boldly claimed ownership of my property just a few days ago now looked exactly like a trapped animal. He turned his head toward his wife, reaching out across the armrest to grasp her hand. Melissa flinched away from his touch as if she had been burned. She pushed her chair back across the carpet, creating a clear physical barrier between them. Brian sat alone in the center of the room, completely surrounded by his own documented lies. For the very first time in his entire life, the man realized he had absolutely no defense left. The heavy silence in the conference room stretched out for a long minute. Brian sat completely frozen in his leather chair, staring at the final financial ledger resting on the mahogany table. $59,000 in documented liabilities sat firmly under his name, and the reality of that massive number seemed to drain the remaining color from his face. "There has to be a way to reverse this," my son pleaded, turning his desperate gaze toward the property manager. "David, you can just cancel the charge. Tell the credit bureau it was an administrative error. I am the son of the owner, so there must be a family exemption in the building bylaws." David adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and folded his hands neatly over his keyboard. "The community guidelines do not recognize family exemptions for unauthorized occupancy, Mr. Brooks. A corporate lease was formally abandoned because you moved an unvetted resident into the premises. The management firm is legally obligated to recover those lost funds to protect the overall property value of the building, and your signature on the guest registration serves as a binding financial guarantee." The professional detachment in the manager's voice offered absolutely no room for negotiation. He spoke with the quiet authority of a man backed by hundreds of pages of corporate law. The impenetrable wall of his logic left Brian with nowhere else to run. Melissa stood up from her chair. The wooden legs scraped harshly against the carpet, drawing every eye in the room toward her. She did not look at me, and she completely ignored her mother hovering near the door. Her entire focus remained locked onto the man she had been married to for 12 years. "You risked our entire future," my daughter-in-law said, her voice vibrating with a sharp, ragged edge. "We spent 3 years saving for the down payment on that house in the suburbs. We skipped vacations, we drove old cars, and we counted every single penny. Now you have a massive commercial debt attached to your credit score because you wanted to play the big shot." "I was trying to help your mother," Brian shot back, scrambling to his feet to face her. He reached out to grab her elbow, but Melissa snatched her arm away before his fingers could make contact. "I did this for your family, Mel. Do not you dare blame this on me," she snapped, stepping backward toward the glass door. "You lied to me. You lied to my mother. You lied to your father. And you lied to our friends on the internet. You stole property that did not belong to you, and you arrogantly thought your last name made you completely untouchable." She turned around and grabbed the brass handle of the door. Without offering another word, Melissa pulled it open and walked out into the lobby, leaving her husband standing alone near the edge of the conference table. The sharp click of the closing door seemed to break the spell holding Sharon in place. The older woman rushed forward, her canvas shopping bag hitting against her knees with every step. "I am going back to the condominium right now," Sharon announced, her voice pitching high with genuine panic. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, clearly understanding that her presence was the absolute catalyst for the financial avalanche crushing her family. "I will pack my suitcases immediately. The delivery men are supposed to bring the dining set tomorrow morning, but I will call the store and cancel the order. I can be out of the building in 2 hours, Raymond. Just please do not make my daughter pay for this." I remained seated, watching the frantic energy consuming the two people across from me. Brian had assumed that our shared blood gave him the right to bypass my authority. The boy believed that the concept of family automatically erased all legal boundaries, granting him free access to the fruits of my lifelong labor. That was his fatal flaw. He confused unconditional love with unconditional ownership, and the painful collision with reality was finally breaking him down. "Moving out today will stop the daily penalty from compounding," I told Sharon, keeping my tone perfectly measured. I reached out and tapped the ledger resting on the table. However, the documented financial losses remain outstanding. They include 1 month's confirmed premium rental value, remarketing costs, management fees, and every additional expense directly caused by your unauthorized occupancy. The hospital executive already signed a lease with a different building downtown, so that income is permanently gone. Brian sank back into his chair, burying his face in both hands. The man looked completely defeated, his broad shoulders shaking slightly under the tailored fabric of his suit jacket. For decades, I had protected him from the harsh consequences of his impulsive decisions. I bailed him out of minor debts, covered his college tuition, and offered endless support. But stepping in to simply erase this massive mistake would only reinforce his dangerous belief that he could take whatever he wanted without paying the price. "I cannot pay it, Dad," Brian whispered through his fingers. "I simply do not have the cash. The bank will deny our mortgage application the moment they see this collection account, and Melissa will never forgive me for destroying our plans." I slowly gathered the printed emails, the access logs, and the security photographs, sliding the thick stack of paper back into its manila folder. Snapping the metal prongs shut secured the evidence chain that had systematically dismantled his arrogant charade. With my hands resting flat on the cover, I looked directly across the table. The boy needed to understand the true cost of respect. While I was not going to let him lose his marriage or his future home, I absolutely refused to let him walk away without carrying a heavy, permanent reminder of his actions. He needed a boundary so solid that he would never dare to cross it again. "There is exactly one way out of this," I said, allowing the quiet hum of the building's air conditioning to fill the room for several seconds before finishing my thought. "I will negotiate a settlement with the property management firm on your behalf, but the terms of my offer are completely non-negotiable." I kept my hands folded neatly on top of the manila folder, letting the heavy silence stretch for another agonizing moment. "First, you will wire the exact amount of the Homeowners Association penalty directly into my checking account before noon today," I instructed, keeping my voice entirely devoid of anger. "I will then write a personal check to the building management to clear the debt, which will completely remove your name from their collection system. Second, you will reimburse me for 1 full month of the lost corporate lease to cover my immediate damages. I know about the private savings account you keep at the credit union downtown, so do not try to tell me you lack the liquid funds." Brian flinched violently, and his shoulders pulled tightly inward. He had hidden that specific account from his wife for 5 years, keeping a comfortable safety net for his own private use. You cannot hide financial footprints from a man who spent 40 years tracking assets and analyzing credit reports. Sharon did not wait for her son-in-law to offer a defense. The older woman turned around, grabbed the heavy brass handle of the office door, and walked quickly out into the lobby without looking back. She finally understood that the free ride was officially over, and she was not going to stick around to watch the financial fallout crush her family. By 2 o'clock that same afternoon, a small, rented moving van idled loudly in the concrete loading bay. I stood in the marble lobby near the concierge desk, watching quietly as the exact same workers in blue uniforms carried the heavy area rug back out through the sliding glass doors. The rough fabric scraped against the metal doorframe, echoing loudly in the quiet space. Sharon followed them with her canvas tote bag clutched tightly against her chest. She handed her plastic guest key fob directly to the security guard, completely avoiding my gaze as she stepped out into the humid spring air. Melissa lingered behind in the lobby long after the moving truck drove away. My daughter-in-law looked completely exhausted, and her heavy designer purse now hung limply from her shoulder. She walked slowly over to where I stood near the polished mahogany desk, her expensive boots clicking softly against the stone floor. "I should have asked you directly," Melissa said quietly, her voice lacking any of its usual sharp edge. "I just wanted to believe him because it made everything so much easier for my mother. I am very sorry for treating you like an obstacle in your own home." "You trusted your husband," I replied, offering her a small, brief nod. "That is exactly what a wife is supposed to do. Just remember to verify the deed the next time he offers you a piece of premium real estate." She offered a sad, fragile smile and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the quiet lobby. The following morning, I scheduled an early appointment with the building maintenance director. A technician arrived at Unit 412 promptly at 9 o'clock, carrying a heavy metal toolbox that clanked loudly against his leg. I stood in the hallway and watched him drill out the old deadbolt cylinder, replacing the entire locking mechanism with a brand new smart system. The sharp whine of the power tool drowned out the low hum of the air conditioning. While he worked, I logged into the community portal on my tablet. The digital access profile for Brian Brooks was permanently deleted, and I revoked all of his future guest privileges with 3 simple clicks on the glass screen. Walking back through the empty living room, I stopped directly in front of the stone fireplace. The cheap ceramic rooster was gone, packed away in one of Sharon's cardboard boxes. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the heavy silver frame containing the photograph of my late wife, and set it carefully back in its proper place on the center of the mantel. The condominium was finally quiet again. The familiar scent of lemon wood polish lingered in the air, completely replacing the artificial lavender spray that had burned my throat just a few days ago. My cellular phone vibrated against the kitchen counter later that evening. The banking application confirmed a large wire transfer had successfully cleared into my primary checking account. Brian had drained his secret safety net to pay the penalties, saving his precious credit score but losing a massive chunk of his personal wealth in the process. A few minutes later, my phone began to ring. I answered the call, listening to the heavy static on the line. "The money is there," Brian said, his voice completely flat and defeated. "Melissa is staying at her sister's house tonight, and she took her mother with her. She says she needs time to think about all the lies I told. I really messed everything up." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights blinking against the dark spring sky. The cool glass pressed gently against my fingertips. For decades, I had quietly fixed his mistakes, constantly assuming that my silent support would eventually teach him responsibility. But true boundaries are never built on silent expectations. They are forged entirely through enforced consequences, and the heavy financial blow he absorbed today would teach him far more than any angry lecture ever could. Family love might be a constant, but a deed of trust requires a legal signature. "You are still my son," I told him, watching my own reflection in the dark glass. "But respect will never again be assumed. When you spend your entire life raising a child, society conditions you to believe that your sacrifices must never end. You are told that a good parent constantly gives, endlessly yields, and quietly absorbs every overstep in the sacred name of family. But as you navigate the complex transition from raising a dependent child to dealing with an independent adult, the rules of engagement must fundamentally change. This story is not just a dramatic tale about a stolen condominium or a massive financial penalty. It is a vital, educational lesson about the absolute necessity of establishing unshakable boundaries with the people you love the most. You might feel a deep, agonizing guilt the first time you tell your grown children no. You might lay awake at night wondering if protecting your own assets makes you a cold or selfish parent. It does not. Your primary responsibility is no longer to cushion their fall, but to ensure they understand how the real world operates. The hardest truth you must accept is that unconditional love does not equal unconditional access. Your financial security, your carefully maintained property, and your hard-earned peace of mind are the direct results of your lifetime of labor. They are not a communal resource waiting to be plundered by entitled relatives who mistake your quiet patience for weakness. When family members attempt to bypass your authority and hijack your resources, they are not acting out of love. They are acting out of pure convenience and assumed privilege. You have the absolute right to protect what belongs to you, utilizing every legal and administrative tool at your disposal. You do not need to scream, you do not need to throw a dramatic tantrum, and you certainly do not need to engage in an endless, emotionally draining argument. You can simply step back, document the truth, and let the structured consequences of the real world do the heavy lifting for you. True authority does not require a raised voice. It only requires the quiet, unwavering enforcement of the rules you have set. Teaching your adult children that their reckless actions carry heavy, tangible consequences is perhaps the final and most important lesson you will ever give them. When you refuse to step in and shield them from the financial or legal penalties of their own arrogant decisions, you force them to grow up. You force them to recognize that respect is a currency that must be continually earned, not a permanent inheritance they are entitled to draw from simply because they share your last name. Holding your ground might cause a temporary fracture in the family dynamic, and it might invite harsh words or periods of heavy silence. However, a relationship built on the active exploitation of your resources was never truly whole to begin with. You must fiercely protect your sanctuary and your legacy. You must demand the respect you have rightfully earned over the decades, and you must never apologize for expecting the grown adults in your life to behave with integrity. Now, take a moment to reflect on your own journey and the invisible lines you have had to draw in your own life. Have you ever found yourself in a difficult situation where a trusted family member completely overstepped a clear boundary, assuming they had a free pass simply because they were related to you? How did you handle that emotional confrontation? And did you manage to hold your ground and protect your peace? Please share your own experiences and thoughts in the comments below, because your personal victory might be the exact inspiration someone else desperately needs to hear today.